right, we're live at PRI with Robin Miller, and thank you for joining me. What's your assessment of how the IndyCar Series is handling the situation with the Milwaukee Mile?
Well, I would have loved to seen the championship end at the Milwaukee Mile and not Sonoma, because I think there would have been a lot better crowd and a lot better race. And the tradition of Milwaukee, I think if you made that the last race of the year and had a test day on Wednesday, you could have got 30,000 people again. I think it would have been. I think you could really work that thing in. But they change the date every year at Milwaukee. So how are you going to get people to plan vacations and things? The schedule bothers me. The whole schedule sucks. In the season when they do sucks, and the way the schedule's laid out, it's not very good.
Well, traditionally, when Milwaukee was the weekend after Indy, that was when it was at its heyday.
Absolutely.
And everything was great. I mean, why would they go away from
all the way through the 80s and 90s? I mean, it was even in Kart's late 90s. It was still a nice crowd, and then both groups started running there, and it was terrible. So
the racing itself on track hasn't been the issue. It's been promotion and everything else.
I get mixed emotions, but I think starting the race at 4 o'clock is insane, because you can't get anybody from Indianapolis and Chicago. They're not going to drive home at 3 in the morning to go to work on Monday. They're not going to do it. And I know a lot of people at Milwaukee and Indianapolis that don't go to Milwaukee anymore because they're not going to get home that late. And I mean, I work for NBC, so I understand the TV impacts, but my whole deal is sports cars were tape delayed by a day and got a 1.1 on Fox. We could tape delay the IndyCar race 3 hours. It's not going to hurt.
Right. Even with the way ESPN tape delays the NHRA,
absolutely,
they're getting good ratings with their shows.
Wouldn't hurt a bit. That's just my take. I think that's exactly what they need to do.
What do you think of the job that Michael Andretti's doing as a promoter, trying to get that race going better?
I think he's I think they've tried with the fan zone. I mean, I think they're making an effort. I just don't know. They raised the ticket prices the very first year after, and I was thinking, don't raise ticket prices till you get a good crowd again. I just don't know. I know some people that live in Milwaukee that say they do a good job, and other people say they don't know it exists. So I don't know what to think, because they don't live there. What is it?
I live in the Milwaukee area, so I know there's little building up to it, and then race week they hit it hard. But by that point, you're not getting a lot on the walk-up sales. I mean, they're getting some, but Milwaukee traditionally had a good season ticket holder base over the years. So I don't know if it's just the way he's marketing it that's not working, or is it the rift in the series over the years, or
the malaise where people got in the habit of not going. That has a lot to do with it. People used to plan their summer, I'm going to Milwaukee, whether it's the August race in the fair or the week after the Indy 500. And then they started racing once a year, and it was still a good crowd. God, they had 50-some thousand in 93 and 94 for Mansell. And you just kind of go, okay, how are we going to get it back? Well, you get it back, I think, I think the ticket prices need to be cheaper. I do. I just think you got to get people in there, sell them beer and hot dogs and soft drinks once you get them in there. Because the good news is that Michael stepped up and rescued. Hello, men. How are you guys? The good news is Michael stepped in and rescued it, But the bad news is that I don't know how you get it. I don't know how you get everybody to come back. I wish I knew the answer, but I'd love to see Elkhart Lake and Milwaukee run back to back and have some kind of a co-promotion. I think Champ Car tried that one year, but nobody. I think now that there's a unified series, I think something like that might work, because there's so many open wheel fans in Wisconsin. My God, that's the thing.
The sprints and midgets draw big crowds at the various tracks in Wisconsin all the time.
And they went. Where did those fans go? They went somewhere. They were all fans at one time. Did they all go to NASCAR? They couldn't have all gone to NASCAR. No. So I'm just glad it's still on the schedule. I just don't like the way it's positioned.
Do you think part of the draw that helped make Milwaukee what it was for the Indy cars was the fact that back in the day when there were 8 races at the mile every year combined between the 2 IndyCar and the 6 stock car races, when you had some drivers that would drive both the stock cars and the Indy cars?
Well, that helped, but you hit the nail on the head. It was the guys that were at Indy the week after the Indy 500. You couldn't get a ticket to Milwaukee. I remember going there in the 60s. Couldn't get a ticket. And it was such a big deal, and people look forward to it. Yeah, I know there's more things to do and all that. And it's never going to fill up like it did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Boy, we ought to be able to get 25 or 30,000 people to come back to Milwaukee, or a good crowd, because it's always been a hotbed for open wheel racing, and there's got to be something that I'm not sure what it is, if it's the prices or the time of the race or the time of the year, but I think it's all three combined.
What do you think of the racing in general in Wisconsin as far as that goes?
Well, we should be at Elkhart Lake. It's still the best road course. I mean, other than, the new one in Austin's nice, but Elkhart Lake's always going to be my favorite. And even though it was built 50 or 60 years ago, it's still racy as hell, and you got to be a badass to get around Elkhart Lake. When I raced midgets, we always went to Wisconsin. We went to Hales Corners and Wilmot, and I just remember there's 4 or 5 tracks that we always went to in Wisconsin. Always had good racing, and they knew how to prepare tracks. And Wisconsin's one of the. Why wouldn't you want to end the season at Milwaukee in the heartland of where your fan base is? Your fan base isn't in Sonoma, California. It's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Chicago and Indianapolis. It's the Midwest. I just shake my head because I think Michael talked to him about ending the season at Milwaukee, which I think could really have been made into a big deal.
Well, speaking of the point about what you said about the base being in the Midwest, do you think the fact that there's more foreign drivers in the series have hurt it in this
No,
area?
I don't think so, because even in its heyday, when kart was in its heyday, there was a lot of foreign drivers like Emerson and Nigel Mansell and stuff. But they were, Scott Dixon's as good a driver as anybody that's come down the pike in the last 20 years, and he's about as American as we are. I mean, he lives in Indianapolis, and it's hard to say what makes people. But we just saw a good example here of the crowd that Rusty Wallace drew. That's Rusty Wallace. He hadn't driven a race car in 10 years, but he's still a big deal and a big name. If A.J. Foyt or Bobby Unser would have been here, we'd have had the same crowd, but it would have taken somebody from way back. Today's Scott Dixon could walk down the street in any city in the United States and no one has a clue who he is. And he's a fabulous racer. He's a great guy. He's a good interview. And he's a delightful guy to be around. But nobody knows him because nobody knows anything about IndyCar racing.
Is that just from a PR standpoint, or
It's PR. It's marketing. It's promotion. It's not having big sponsors that get you commercials and stuff like that. That's all that. All together. All those things roll together.
Obviously, with money being the way it is nowadays, can a race survive both at the mile and at Road America?
I don't know. I talk to George every now and then. He goes, "Hey, we're open to an IndyCar race. We're not going to pay the sanction fee they want." So it's going to be a matter of IndyCar. I think Randy Bernard cut Michael a deal the first year. He brought it back and said, "No sanction fee. Just run the race for me." Well, you obviously, so he's being charged a sanction fee now. But the whole key is that you just have to if you got to work with somebody for 3 or 4 years to try and build the race back up, then you got to cut them a break, because it's not like there's a big demand for an IndyCar race everywhere. It's not like NASCAR, and you just got to be smart. You got to be smart about how you. This is the oldest racetrack in the country. It's your heritage, the Milwaukee Mile. Some of the greatest races of all time, some of the greatest drivers of all time have competed there. You can't forget that. You got to make that important, and I don't know that IndyCar understands that. I mean, their record books start in 1996. Really?
Considering how NASCAR and IndyCar are struggling to draw crowds everywhere.
Well, but when you say that, Bristol's half full, but it's still 85,000 people. So
right.
it's
and tracks are tearing out stands in some of the
right.
The
Charlotte's taking seats down, but look at their TV ratings. There's still 5 or 6 million people.
Right. Back in the day when USAC ran the twin races with an IndyCar and a stock car race the same day, same track, do you think if NASCAR and IndyCar got together and did something similar with a short distance race like that would be something that would draw?
Oh, it could, but NASCAR's not about to go race on a track where cars are going to go 60 miles an hour faster. That ain't never going to happen. Never. And the USAC IndyCar connection was because of USAC. But you're never going to see NASCAR run with IndyCar. Ain't going to happen.
Do you think there'll ever be more NASCAR drivers that'll attempt driving an IndyCar race somewhere again, or is this kind of a one-off thing every so often?
I think every so often. Casey Kane wants to do it, but Hendrick's not going to let him. Jimmy Johnson wanted to do it till Dan Weldon lost his life, and then his wife said no chance. Jeff Gordon has no interest. Stewart's too fat to get in the car right now. And I'd say
Kurt Busch did a good job
did a real good job, and I know Kyle Busch wants to do it, but Joe Gibbs isn't going to let him. So they're just bound. Those days are long since gone, and it's too bad because Cale and Leroy and Bobby and Donnie Allison. I mean, I was around when they all ran Indy, and it was they were were all big stars in NASCAR, but they were just another guy at Indy. I mean, of all the things, yeah, Kurt Busch went to one of the best teams, but he did a really good job in the race. He was really smart. Here comes my man I'm interviewing.
One last question,
Sure.
On a personal basis. I know you were a big fan of Jim Hurtubise over the years, and my dad always used to tell me a story of sometime in the mid-'60s before I was born, when he was running for Norm Nelson. He had a lead late in the race of the September 250-mile race, but Nelson needed points to win the championship, and Hurtubise's white flag lap just came to a stop in the backstretch just to let
Norm,
Nelson
yeah,
pass by.
because
Is that a true story?
yeah, oh yeah, that's true. That was Herc. He knew where his bread was buttered. Plus, Norm bought him a case of beer. That's all he needed. Beer was more important to Herc than winning.